Okay, so as Kate said, I've been working on the Middle to Upper Paleolithic transition in Iberia, which, if anybody doesn't know, is Spain and Portugal. And the project that I've done is part of a much, much bigger project looking at this period across Western Europe. So we've dated sites in France and Germany, Italy, Belgium, and the UK as well. So I'll be drawing on a few of other people's work throughout this talk. But mainly, I'm talking about the work in Iberia. And these are my collaborators, so an awful lot of people, mainly the site excavators. So for anybody who doesn't know, the Middle to Upper Paleolithic transition is the transition between the Mousterian and the modern human people. So Neanderthals were in Europe, and then we have, from what I think anyway, and this is the perspective that I'm going to present today, a modern human immigration from somewhere in the east. So in the Mousterian, we have a mainly flake-based industry, no real kind of ornamentation. There are a few very, very controversial cases, but there's not a lot, if there is any. And we know that this was produced by Neanderthals. Then we have, stratigraphically above the Mousterian always, various transitional industries. So the one that I'm going to mention today is the Châtelperronian, and there are also, I'll probably quickly mention also the Alutsian, which is found in Italy. Now these are transitional industries, kind of because they look a little bit like the Mousterian, but also a bit like the Upper Pal. So the standard way is to say they're kind of bladelet industries, but they're produced using similar methods to the Mousterian. That's a very kind of simplistic way of viewing it. There are some ornaments, but again, very controversial. They're traditionally thought to be produced by Neanderthals, although this is now being cast into doubt. We have supposedly modern human teeth associated with the Alutsian in Italy, and the association between Neanderthals and the Châtelperronian has been questioned in the two sites where we find the two together. So this is it could be modern human, but we're just not quite sure. And then we have the Aurignacian, which is kind of the Upper Paleolithic proper. These are the terms that I'm using. So the Proto-Aurignacian is always found in Spain before the early Aurignacian, and the early Aurignacian is always found before the evolved, and the evolved always found before the late. Now, can you see my marker? Yeah. These are characteristic of the Proto-Aurignacian. They're Dufour bladelets of the Dufour subtype, very short, straight bladelets removed from prismatic cores. They're kind of the index fossil of the Proto-Aurignacian. This is a split-base bone point, and this is the index fossil of the early Aurignacian. And then this is a bone point, and it is characteristic of the evolved Aurignacian. Okay, that's very, very simplistic. I'm not a lithic specialist, so this is about the only lithics that you're going to see. Whenever I say I've dated the Proto-Aurignacian, I've dated an assemblage that somebody else has called a Proto-Aurignacian. So I've worked with lots of different archaeologists. They all use different typological systems. A lot of them are now using technological approaches as well. But it means that there is some variability between the different assemblages that I'm dating that are not brought out by the names. I don't see this as a problem. I think probably quite a lot of you might do, because it's quite an initial study. And if we have lots of different Proto-Aurignacian assemblages, which give very different ages, that gives an opportunity really for people who understand lithics a lot more than people from a radiocarbon lab to go in and say, well, why are the differences between these assemblages? Is it a problem with palimpsesting? Are these things not actually all the same? Okay, so the main questions really in the Middle to Upper Paleolithic transition are looking at the dispersal of modern humans. Where did they come from? How did they get into Europe, and why did they choose those routes? Why did Neanderthals become extinct? Was there any interaction between modern humans and Neanderthal, and what were the consequences of this? And the ever-present modern behavior, however you define it. Were Neanderthals capable of it? And if they were, then what does that mean for when the capability for modern human behavior, however you define it, evolved? So the main why point is generally related to the environment. So this is the oxygen isotope record from NGRIP. Cold is right down at the bottom, and warm is at the top. We're placed kind of between about here and around here. I'm going to talk about today. And the main thing that most people talk about is Heinrich event 4, a very cold, in the Atlantic region, event just after 40,000 calibrated, 30,000 years BP on the GICC 05 timescale. Okay, so chronology has a huge role to play in many of these debates. One that I'm mostly going to focus on today is the why did Neanderthals become extinct, and the dispersal of modern humans, what was forcing that or stopping that. And the hypothesis that I'm going to test is using the environment as the reason. Okay, so the transition in Iberia, there are lots of different interpretations. The one that you've probably heard of is called the Ebro frontier hypothesis. This is the most widely published one. And it suggests that we have early modern humans arrive at around 42,000 calibrated years. If you're used to seeing uncalibrated dates, that's about 36.5 thousand years. And in the south, we had a Neanderthal refugia, and Neanderthals became extinct, and modern humans appeared at around 32,000 years. So up here, Joao is saying that the first modern humans are associated with, or the Aurignacian is an indicator for the modern humans. Okay, so this idea is based firstly on the typology. So in the north, we have a couple of sites with the Chateaubriand, a few sites with the Proto-Aurignacian, and a few sites with the early Aurignacian. There are no sites in the south with really nice large Proto-Aurignacian assemblages or early Aurignacian. There are not even scattered split base bone points like you kind of find in the south of Italy. But you do have a very few evolved Aurignacian assemblages. These are all very debated. Some people don't believe them at all. And a few late Aurignacian. Again, by late Aurignacian, Joao is usually referring to scattered backed bladelets. They're not proper nice big 100-piece assemblages or anything like that. So again, this is also quite dubious. The first kind of fluorescence in Upper Paleolithic we get in the south is associated with the Gravettian, which is a post-Aurignacian assemblage. So it's also based on radiocarbon dates. So these are the sites in the south of Iberia which have got post 42,000 industries, post 42,000-year-old dates associated with Neanderthal or Mysterian industries. So you can see there's quite a few of them. So a lot of people would say, oh, we've got so many of these sites. Of course we have late Neanderthals and late Mysterian in the south. So Joao would say that this is because there was a biogeographical boundary around the Ebro Valley. It's very approximate. It could be, it could be down here, it could be right up in the mountains here. Joao always does a thin line, but in fact he means a fat line. And he thinks that south of this line, during H4, so during this Heinrich event, it became arid and dry and cold, but then trees recolonized very, very rapidly. and this was not the case in the north. And he would say that modern humans, the Auric nation was adapted for open plains, so that they would not choose to go into a wooded environment in the south, and this enabled a Neanderthal refugium right down in the south. And the implications for this, well, interbreeding, the Lagavulin child from 26,000, I think, approximately, is supposedly, according to Joao and Eric Trinkhaus, a hybrid, or derived from a hybrid. And also it means that acculturation is not an inevitable effect of contact. What I mean by this is the Châtelperronian, if produced by Neanderthals, various people would say Neanderthals just borrowed the idea of modern humans. They didn't independently develop this Upper Paleolithic-like technology. They weren't capable of it. That can only have occurred if modern humans were in the same place at the same time as the Neanderthals. What Joao is saying is that's not inevitable. You could have contact between modern humans and Neanderthals and not have this exchange of technology. I don't really buy into either of these implications. What I'm mainly interested in is why on earth would you have that kind of pattern? This is not supported, I should say, by the marine records, which suggest that throughout the whole of Heinrich Event 4, this was a very arid, very dry environment dominated by steppe, dominated by grassland. So, how good is the chronology for the south of Iberia? Well, for the whole of Iberia, actually. It's basically based on radiocarbon dating. About 2/3 of the dates from 50,000 years all the way through to Gravettian are radiocarbon. The uranium series, TL, ESR, tend to have very, very large errors. So they're not really used at all in any of the interpretations. The interpretation is based almost entirely on radiocarbon dating, both AMS and conventional. And this is the results. So these are the radiocarbon dates from northern Spain that are published. And you can see that the stratigraphy that we saw before, so you always find the Mysterian beneath the Châtelperronian and the Châtelperronian beneath the Aurignation, really doesn't stand up. I mean, you have crazy dates. These three here are direct dates on Neanderthals of just over 10,000 calibrated years. That's just ludicrous. You have the Aurignation all the way through to 20,000 calibrated years. Seems a bit odd again. The Châtelperronian, these three dates are from one site that I will talk about later, that range in age by 10,000 years. Very, very unusual. I should also say at this point, because you're going to see a lot of these graphs, and I'll take you through them slowly, this plot is just a plot of calibrated ages. And I'm going to use OxCal the whole way through, and I'm calibrating against InkCalo 9, which is the most up-to-date calibration curve that goes to 50,000 years. So you can see they're all cutting off at 50K here. Okay? So why then do you get this scatter in radiocarbon dates? There's three reasons. The first one is contamination. So here we've got a plot of your actual sample age versus your measured sample age if you were to add a certain amount of contamination of a certain age. So the black line down the middle is if you have no contamination at all, and the green line is if you add 5% dead carbon. So this is carbon with no carbon-14 in it at all. And you can see that there's practically no difference, definitely not significant at 40,000 years. If, however, you add just 0.5% modern carbon, you have an enormous effect. So what's that? 1% modern carbon at 50,000 years is going to give you an age of 37,000 years. So you can have an enormous effect from just a very, very tiny amount of modern carbon, which you do not have in the much younger periods. The other one, okay, so this is an example. This is El Sidron, a site in Cantabria in the northwest of Spain. It's an amazing site. There's well over 1,000 Neanderthal fragments. Some of them are articulated, as here. It's the site where they've done an enormous amount of DNA work, which suggests that you've got a single family group here. Everything points to the fact that you have that these Neanderthals were deposited very, very rapidly. There's about 12 individuals. They're covered in butchery marks. So it looks like they were butchered, deposited in a dolmen. That dolmen collapsed very soon after they were deposited there. There's no carnivore gnawing. There's practically no rodent gnawing, and washed into this cave. But if these are the radiocarbon dates, direct radiocarbon dates, actually on the Neanderthals themselves, so they should all be identical. And you can see they range from 10,000 years all the way back to 50,000. These two dates here were done by Gif-Surivet, using a really nice technique of dating bone, where they're actually dating the amino acids. The rest of these dates were done using kind of older methods of dating bone. So you extract the collagen, the protein, and then you don't really purify it. And you can kind of see the problems that result. So the second one is the ever-present sample selection problem. If you want to date a Neanderthal, it's better to date the Neanderthal directly. This isn't always possible. This mandible is actually from Zephyria. It contains no collagen at all, and it's covered in PVA. So we don't really want to even try to date that further. So it would be best to try to date bone found in the same context, which has got butchery marks, so that it's likely that those Neanderthals, or some Neanderthals, butchered the faunal bones. There's a association between the human activity and the sample that you're dating. Unfortunately, at Zephyria, there is no cut-marked bone. It's a very, very, very ephemeral occupation. So you can date unmodified bone. It's not as good, but if you date enough of it, you're going to date the context at least. So you get a range of age during which the Neanderthals could have been deposited. And that's better than dating tiny flecks of charcoal that can move very, very easily through the sediment. The third problem has always been quoted as calibration. This was the state in 2006, where you had various different calibration records that were very, very inconsistent. So at the bottom, you've got your estimated date. This could be from derived from uranium series dating, or counting layers, or oxygen isotope records, and your radiocarbon determination. And you can see they're completely inconsistent. This is the state now, where we have two main records. They're both marine, unfortunately, and a calibration curve in red. And you can see that the two, the purple and the blue records, I mean, they're not in perfect agreement, but they're not crazy. They're not all over the place like they were before. And we're slowly adding records. There'll be a new one from Lake Suigetsu is under construction now. This is a lake in Japan, so we'll get the first terrestrial record. And there's some speleotherms as well that should be included in the next calibration curve. But they all agree reasonably well. So it's not a massive problem, particularly when you look at the errors that we get. Okay, so in Iberia, we have nearly from my database, there's nearly 400 radiocarbon dates. If you look at how well they're associated, so we have 16% that are well associated. So this is my top two classes that I just went through. So Neanderthals, cut-marked bone, charcoal from hearths. And we have the vast majority are poorly associated. Many of them are just dispersed charcoal flecks. If we look at the pre-treatments that have been applied, there are 6% I would regard as reliable. This is ABOX, ultrafiltration, so the two techniques that I'm going to talk about, and then ninhydrin, this is Gif-Surivet, technique that was used at El Cedron. The vast majority are done using ABA, very, very old-fashioned bone preparations. And then the most scary thing is that only 8 fall into the top category of both. So this would suggest that we shouldn't trust those any of the chronology from Iberia without testing it further. Okay. So this has led to really, really inconsistent interpretations. Now this is going to seem like I'm taking a bit of a dig at this guy, João Zilhau, but actually he is one of the harshest critiques, apart from when he's dealing with his own sites, but we'll come to that. But even João is inconsistent. So the top quote I've got, this is his description of a site called Ermitons. This is in the foothills of the Pyrenees, where you've got a Mousterian level with 2 bones, both unmodified, from a very, very sparsely occupied level, and there's an awful lot of hyena denning in that level as well. And he says, if not related to issues of undetected contamination, this spread is likely related to the fact that the level is a hyena den. The dated bones are unlikely to be associated with human use of the site. So he picks up both the problem with contamination and the problem with association. However, when he's talking about the origination in Maiates, this is one of the very, very rare sites in the south of Spain where you have an origination. In fact, there's only 3 dates on the origination at all from the whole of southern Spain. And he's talking about 1 charcoal sediment, so a mixture of charcoal and sediment, dates obtained in the 1970s from a sparsely occupied level. They actually took the charcoal sediment, I think about 30 years after the original excavation in the 1940s, from an adjacent profile, so not at all related to the occupation in the initial excavation, a charcoal sample, so he ignores the fact that there's any sediment in there, conventionally dated to 48.8 thousand calibrated years, is fully consistent with this diagnosis of the assemblage being origination, and confirms human occupation of the cave, which is completely ignores the fact that it's completely unassociated and that it was a conventional date on a bulk charcoal sediment sample. So that's kind of, the interpretation that you get. Everybody thinks, just basically picks and chooses which date they like, which is quite a big problem. And the other thing I just want to draw attention to is the enormous preservation bias across Iberia. So these are little pie charts of how much nitrogen there is left in bone. So in a bone, we want to date protein. The problem is protein degrades very, very easily in hot environments. So in the north, where it's a little bit cooler, this is kind of green when you look at it on Google Earth, and the bottom is yellow. There's higher proportions of black on these pie charts. That means more of these bones contain protein. In the south, most bones do not contain protein. So we have a massive, great big bias in preservation, which would suggest that dates in the south are more likely to be problematic than dates in the north. Okay, so I wanted to build a more reliable chronology to test the Ebre frontier. That's quite a lot of work. So the first thing I wanted to do was to date the last Neanderthals in the south, and the second thing was to date the first modern humans in the north. The other two I viewed as subsidiary. We know that Neanderthals, or the Mousterian I should say here, finished before the proto-origination started, just on the grounds of stratigraphy. And the date of the first modern humans in the south was always going to be very, very difficult, because nobody can agree on whether these assemblages are actually origination or Gravettian or Solutrean or something else. So I was going to do this by dating multiple key sites, not just one, selection of anthropogenically modified materials, I was going to use ultrafiltration dating of bone. I'll run through this in a minute, so don't worry if you don't know what I'm talking about. And ABOX for charcoal, calibrating against ink halo 9, and using Bayesian analysis to interpret my dates. Okay, so these are the sites that I dated. The black ones at the top, mainly at the top, are the ones that I actually managed to date, and the white ones, mainly in the bottom, are the ones that had no bone preservation, so I just couldn't date. And many of these as well had no, the charcoal was undateable as well. So you can guess that my chronology from the north is better than my chronology from the south, although I would probably contend that in the south it's more interesting. So ultrafiltration of bone, in case you haven't heard about it, it aims initially to extract the collagen, this protein component, and then to purify it. So it starts with kind of the standard radiocarbon pretreatment. You got acid to remove carbonates, in this case also the bone mineral, the base to remove the humic acids, these are kind of soil-derived contaminants, and then atmospheric CO2 is soluble in a basic pH, so we have to reacidify to remove that dissolved carbon dioxide. Then we gelatinize. Basically, collagen is constructed of 3 chains of amino acids that are twisted together. So when we gelatinize, we're untwisting those strands, and that makes the collagen soluble. So it will go into solution, and that means we can filter to remove large insoluble contaminants. And most labs would date the residue left behind there. When we ultrafilter, this is an ultrafilter here. It's a membrane that is about the third the size of that strand of amino acids. So we are removing all of the small soluble contaminants from the protein. This is mainly degraded collagen. Okay, so how do we know that they're reliable? Sorry. The first way is that it always produces it always produces older dates than previous methods. So this is the site of Geisenklosteler in Germany. It's been very difficult to date this site in the past. So up the sides, we've got radiocarbon age. It's younger at the bottom, and it's older at the top. These are uncalibrated dates, but that's fine because we're comparing individual samples rather than between samples. So essentially, we're comparing the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 within an individual sample, which should be identical, whichever technique you do. You can see that they're not. So the ultrafiltered dates are these black squares, and the grey diamonds are a previous method of dating bone at Oxford called ion exchange. And you can see that while there's 2 dates, tend to be on the younger side, where the 2 methods give identical results. But where the difference, the ultrafiltration date, is always older. So that would suggest, because the effect of young contamination is so much greater than the effect of old contamination, that the ultrafiltration dates are better, much, much better. The other thing that suggests to us that this method works really well is the consistency both between and within sites. So this is the site of Upper Palaeolithic by my supervisor Tom Hyam, who's got an incredible sequence of 32 radiocarbon dates through the site. Now, Upper Palaeolithic is beautiful because it's got occupation layers, these brown layers that are separated by ebuli deposits. So you do not really have a problem between material moving between the layers. So Tom and Roger Jacobi, selected material that was cut marked. So this is the bottom of the site, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 radiocarbon dates that are identical. The level above, we've got another 4 radiocarbon dates that are identical. The level above that, we've got another 4 radiocarbon dates that are identical. So that strongly suggests that ultrafiltration at this site is working very, very well. In 32 dates, there's only one outlier at 95% probability, which is entirely what you'd expect. You'd expect one outlier in 20 dates. Now, this is repeated between many sites now. I'll show you one later, which isn't quite as stunning as this, but it's getting there, I hope. Okay, so a box of charcoal. This is the one that you've probably all heard of because it's being used by Michael Bird to amazing effect in Australia. So it again consists of an acid-base acid kind of protocol. So most people, when they date charcoal, would just do your ABA and date the residue left behind there. With ABOX, you do acid and base, and then you do two oxidation stages. The first one is a chemical oxidation in a very acidic solution, and the second one is a combustion stage. And then you date the residue left over from that, which is rarely very much at all. And for this, charcoal is very, very confusing, very difficult structure. It's very, very variable. But we think that we're probably dating kind of the very high carbon graphitic component. So when you look at charcoal under an SEM, you get this kind of structure with, you can see the lines, and these are the sheets of graphite. It cannot be in kind of these onion shape structures, and that's dispersed within this highly amorphous structure that's very, very high in carbon and oxygen. So we think we're concentrating that component when we do ABOX. It's very difficult to prove, though. So how do we know that ABOX is reliable? Well, I've dated the same reason as before, but we don't really have these very, very long sites where anybody's dated lots and lots and lots of charcoal. So I decided to date some charcoal fragments that were found beneath the companion ignimbrite. This was a massive volcanic explosion. There are visible ash deposits from Italy, where the companion region is, all the way through to Russia. It was a huge, huge explosion. And it's very, very accurately dated by argon to 39,000 years, very precisely, I should say. And this is also in perfect agreement with its stratigraphic position at the start of Heinrich IV, within marine deposits in the Mediterranean, and also within terrestrial lacustrine deposits in Lago Monticchio, right up in the top of Italy, in the mountains, I should say, in central Italy. So we looked at three sites, Cervino, Castelcivita, and Kostenki. Kostenki's in Russia, the other two are in Italy, and dated 10 charcoal fragments. You can see that the ABA dates are all too young, and the ABOX dates all lie either within error or just before the age of the companion ignimbrite, which suggests to us that ABOX is correct. I'm hoping you're saying now, but all of those ABA dates are perfectly consistent, and you told us that consistency is a good indicator for reliability, for accuracy. I would agree. I suspect very strongly that these young ABA dates are to do with contamination added in the laboratory. It's yet to be proven. It's a big problem in radiocarbon dating. You have to be very, very careful that you're not adding carbon in the lab. It's just one of a whole host of reasons why you can have ages that are too young. It's why contamination is a very broad kind of idea. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to take you through is Bayesian analysis. We do Bayesian analysis because radiocarbon dates are not really that interesting. So a single or two or three different radiocarbon dates are not going to tell you when modern humans appeared somewhere, or whether they lived at the same time as Neanderthals, or how long was that overlap. You need to build a chronological framework to answer those kind of questions. So if you've never seen Bayesian analysis or this kind of approach, it's a way of incorporating the relative information that you've got from your stratigraphy with your radiocarbon dates. So if you have a site, this is Cueva Mordin, at the bottom, we're assuming that stuff down here is younger than stuff at the top. It's not always true, but in Mordin, that is the case. So then we build a model. So these blocks are the stratigraphy. So at the bottom, we have our first phase, and this will start, okay? Then we'll have a transition to the second phase, the second sedimentary unit, and then we'll have a transition, so this red thing, to the next phase, and then that will end. What I really want you to take from the slide is that word boundary, because I'm going to be talking about boundaries for the rest of the talk. And these are the modeled ages for the transition between one phase and the next. And then you can see these are the radiocarbon dates that are associated with each one of those phases. And they will overlap slightly because of the error in the radiocarbon date. Okay, so results, finally, from northern Iberia. Okay, so this is, again, a very, very nice site. I'm just going to take you through examples, don't worry, otherwise we'll be here for ages. This is from a site, Lebeca-Coba, right up in the northeast, in the foothills of the Pyrenees, and also the Cantabrian range over here. It's a site very much like Upper Palaeolithic that has occupations separated by sterile units. It's not a very well-known site. I think it should be more well-known, personally. At the bottom, we've got a sterile layer, archaeologically sterile, a huge number of hyenas. Then we have quite a limited Chattel-Perronian. I can't remember how many lithics there are, but there's something like 3 Chattel-Perron points. So you are kind of heading towards kind of index fossil rather than any proper kind of analysis. But most people, I think, are happy with that analysis. Then we have a sterile layer. Then we get our proto-orignation, and then 3 early orignation levels above that. And we have split base bone points in the 2 lower orignation, early orignation levels, I should say. Okay, so in red, I've got the radiocarbon dates that were available when I started working on the site. They were all on bone that had been treated just with an acid wash. They'd been gelatinized, so made soluble, and then filtered. So a very, very simple technique. And the lab said that they needed to do this because the bone was terribly preserved. There was hardly any collagen left in the bone. And this was because most of the site is actually open air. The cave has completely collapsed, apart from this tiny weeny little bit at the back. And you can see that the dates are very inconsistent as you go through the stratigraphy. These 3 were the favored because they were the oldest. Unfortunately, these 3 dates have been quoted time and time again within the literature because the site is so nice, because you've got these sterile layers separating your Chattel-Perronian from your proto-orignation. So what we did was to select recherchoirs. These are bones that are used to nap lithics from the proto-orignation and the early orignation, and from the Chattel-Perronian, we selected just butchered bone. And you can see again, much like Upper Palaeolithic, we've got a very, very, very consistent chronology. There's one outlier here. This bone was found right next to the wall of the cave, and I should never have sampled it in the first place. Never ever sample near walls of caves because you've got a big gap. I was silly. So these are the 3 things that I'm most interested for the moment. So this is the start of the Chattel-Perronian, which using the modelled boundary, so this is the boundary for the start of the Chattel-Perronian, for the transition between the sterile layer below and the occupation level above, at 43 to about 42,000. So pre-Joao's 42, which is in agreement with what he would say. Then we have 42.7 to 41.7 thousand years for the transition, the end of the Chattel-Perronian, and then the start of the proto-orignation at 42 to 41,000. So this is in perfect accordance with Joao's eyeball approach, which is incredible sometimes. The second point to note is that our Heinrich event is here, and we have human occupation continuing through Heinrich event 4, starting before Heinrich event 4 and then continuing all the way through. So this very, very cold, harsh event, supposedly, did not stop humans occupying this area. Unfortunately, there is no very good paleo-environmental record from the Beka for this time period, so it's difficult to say whether what the conditions were exactly in the cave at that time, which is why we're having to compare to Engrip, which is not ideal at all. Okay, so the bigger picture, that's just one site. I've dated lots of sites, and these are the boundaries from those sites. So we're not interested at the moment in the late Aurignacian or the Gravettian, so just ignore that. So at the bottom, we've got the end of the Mysterian at La Breda, the end of the Mysterian at Abric Romani, which is one site that I think is well dated. And then we've got the start and end boundaries of the Châtel Perronian from La Beka, the start of the Proto-Aurignacian at 3 sites, and the end of the Proto-Aurignacian at 3 sites. And then the start of the early Aurignacian at 2 sites. La Gama is in grey because this is a preliminary study. They wouldn't put their hands on the heart and say it was early Aurignacian. So, but they suspect it is. Whether they suspect it is because I got dates, I don't know. And then the end of the early Aurignacian. And the first thing that you can notice is that they're in stratigraphic order, which is good compared to the previous mess that we had before. So I'm just going to take you through the order in which things happened. Okay, now because we have probability distributions, we can say whether something happened before something else at 95% probability. So I can say that the Châtel Perronian appears before the Proto-Aurignacian appears, okay? Which agrees with the stratigraphy but has been debated long and hard. I can't say whether the Châtel Perronian disappears or the Mysterian disappears before the Proto-Aurignacian appears. They're statistically indistinguishable. The errors are too large. We need to do more work to try to constrain the age of this final Mysterian. Unfortunately, when you date Mysterian deposits, they usually become much older and fall off the end of the calibration curve, such as El Cidron, El Castillo, Arior, all of them just went off the end of the calibration curve. Okay, so then we have Heinrich IV event occurs and human occupation continues. And the evolved Aurignacian appears after Heinrich event 4. So the first conclusion then is modern humans did not stop at the Ebro because of H4. They were already there. They occupied the region during H4. I cannot see, how H4 would have stopped them going south. We should still see the Proto-Aurignacian in the southern regions if Joao's hypothesis is true. So this is just a comparison to other sites in Western Europe, just in case you were wondering, really. So again, with the same colour, so the end of the Mysterian. Again, we haven't got many dates on this, but it's around the same period. We haven't got really anything much beyond this. This is my start of the Châtel Perronian. This is the Aluzian, which I mentioned before at Cavallo in southern Italy, down here, which appears to be a little bit earlier. And if anybody saw an article in Nature last year, there's 2 deciduous molars found actually in the level that this boundary dates of modern human, supposedly, teeth. So supposedly we have modern humans at this time in southern Italy, long before, or definitely before the Châtel Perronian in Spain. And this is actually a model date for modern human maxilla from this one here, from Kent's Cavern in the UK, so in Cornwall down there, or Devon, I can't remember. And that again is possibly contemporary with the Châtel Perronian. So it is possible that modern humans were around at the time the Châtel Perronian was being produced. Whether they produced it is still a matter of debate. Then you can see that we have our proto-aurignacian. These are the start dates for proto-aurignacian assemblages. Reasonably consistent, which is reassuring. And then again, start dates for the early aurignation. Whether we can say that these two were, people tend to say the proto-aurignation is earlier than the early aurignation everywhere. Whether this is actually the case, we don't know. I mean, at Cerino, this is a very nice proto-aurignation assemblage. It appears quite late. And then again, we've got consistent start dates for the evolved aurignation. So, okay, southern Iberia. Hieronymus, yes. This again is a reasonably small site in the middle of Iberia. This is just a couple of 100 kilometers north of Madrid. It was excavated in the late 80s. And they found a very small, almost kind of remnant Upper Paleolithic level here. The lithics haven't been properly studied at all. There's just a few blacked bladelets in here. Then we have two Middle Paleolithic levels, a sterile level, and then Mysterian at the bottom. This big sterile unit is flood deposits. And there were 3 radiocarbon dates. One of them was too young, so it was thought to be intrusive. And then we have 2 reasonably consistent dates on charcoal, conventionally dated, so there's massive errors because the samples are tiny. And this one here was found in a hearth. Now, because it's found in a hearth, it's very well associated with human activity, so people think, yes, we've got a really good date. And if we look at them calibrated, this is a model, so this is the date at the bottom. This is the transition between level 2.2 and 2.1, and this is the date in level 2.1. And you can see that they're all probably post 40,000, if not post 42,000. So what we dated was to date cut-marked bone, such as this one here. There's a few cut marks along the edge up here. And we got 3 very, very old radiocarbon dates. So from the Upper Paleolithic level, we got greater than 50,000 years old. Whether this is intrusive or we're not quite sure how to explain it, I think we need to look at the lithics in more detail from this little level, just to see if you do have things that might be Laval while there, which might suggest there's some kind of mixing going on. There was no datable bone from the uppermost Mysterian level, but from the same subsquare as the hearth, there is a bone dated at 49.4 thousand. Now, radiocarbon dates become infinite when the error is greater than 4,000 years. So this is extremely close to being infinite. I wonder if we dated it a few more times, if sometimes it would pop out as infinite, sometimes not. And then from the bottom, we've got a date of greater than 47,000 years old. So these young radiocarbon dates are grossly too young. 20,000 radiocarbon years is kind of a scary offset. So if we go to Zafaria, this is a site you may have heard of. It's right up in the Baetic Mountains in Anjali Cave, which occasionally do get snow. This is the cave up here. It's a great big kind of crack in the rock as you go through the pass of Zafaria. And it's where in the late 80s and early 90s they recovered a beautiful collection of Neanderthals. This is just one mandible. There's 2 mandibles. And it really shot to fame in 1995 when Jean-Jacques Hublin published ages of less than 30,000 uncalibrated. And he used radiocarbon dating. He also used uranium series dating of bone, which I'm sure Rhino's talk to you is very, very problematic because of the movement of uranium into and out of the bone. It's not a closed system. And in 2003, Michelle published a study where she looked at lots of ibex bone and teeth from around the same area that these Neanderthal remains were found. So each one of these depths, so we've got depth down the side and age along the top, so from 0 to 70,000 years here. And each one depth is one sample, dated with different methods. So you can see that there's a massive range in age. There's no real relation between samples and within samples, between techniques and within techniques, which would suggest that all of the dates, well, a large proportion of them are likely to be incorrect. And we can't really say how old the Neanderthal, which was found at 189 centimeters depth, actually was. So what I did was to screen a lot of bones from the site. There were no cut-marked bones from this area anyway. So I had to date unmodified bones. And I only managed to get dates from 3 bones, which isn't a huge number, but there are no more bones left without a little hole in from me. So one bone had been dated before at Oxford using the simple acid-base acid gelatinization and then filtration. So exactly the same as ultrafiltration without the ultrafiltration step. And that gave an age of 33,000 years. So this date here. Now that bone was found slightly above the main cluster of Neanderthals. So this is the main cluster, found within 2 meters squared. And so you've got a mandible up here, a femur, a pelvis, a rib, a large collection here, of butchered and basically cremated, calcined bone from what looked to be a hearth feature. And this bone was above it at 33,000. I redated it using ultrafiltration to greater than 46.7 thousand years. Again, an absolutely enormous difference. And then this date is supported by 2 dates further down the stratigraphy on unmodified ibex bone of 46,000. So this is just, again, within range of radiocarbon, and one of greater than 49,000. Whether kind of these bones are just on the limit of being infinite in age, I'm not quite sure, but they're definitely not 30,000 years old. So we have 2 published Mysterian sites which were previously dated at less than 42,000 calibrated years, and they're now dated at 50-ish or greater than 50,000. We have no new radiocarbon dates for the Upper Paleolithic. I just wasn't able to get any. But on typology, in comparison to the northern sites, you would expect an age of about 39,000 to 36. So post H4 at the earliest, really. Okay, so are there actually no late? That should be 42,000-year-old Neanderthals in Iberia. I could go through all the sites, but I'd put myself to sleep as you. Most sites can be criticized as having unreliable dates, very poor association, often extremely small assemblages that are called Mysterian because they've got dates of 32K. Gorham's Cave fits into this perfectly. Both Clive Finlayson's new excavations at the back, which have recently got dates of 24,000 uncalibrated, so that's about, I think it comes out about 26,000, 27,000 calibrated. And we also have, I'm not quite sure if these type of assemblages occur elsewhere, but assemblages that look like they're Mysterian but actually have dates of post 30,000. So Lago Vela in Portugal, and also Esquillo in the north of Spain, which was actually identified or thought to be for a very long time produced by Neanderthals, but it has very, very, very consistent dates of around 20,000 uncalibrated radiocarbon in it, which worries me slightly. Okay, So what human presence do we have in southern Iberia, between, kind of in the region that we're interested in? Well, there's only two that I would say there is, and both of them are very dubious. We have no idea what they're associated with, whether it's Mysterian, whether it's something Upper Paleolithic. So the first one is Pego do Diabo in Portugal. This is one of João Zilaus' sites. He thinks that there's an Upper Paleolithic above this because there's 7 backed bladelets. This cut-marked bone was found some way below those bladelets. I think there's a few flakes, but those flakes are likely to not be in situ. They're likely to have washed into the cave with the sediment, or at least that's what the surface of the lithics is like, looks like. So this is a cut-mark bone. There's a cut mark here. I don't know if you can see it here. There's also a conchoidal fracture. So a lot rests on that single striation, but it's got a direct radiocarbon date, an ultrafiltration date of just before 42,000. And then we have Cueva Anton. This is another one of João's sites. He excavates a lot in Murcia, which has yielded this shell. And also, these are the associated lithics. João assures me he's got more than this from the recent campaign, but when he published the shell, this is all he had. And he calls this Mysterian, by the way. So I personally think that is extremely dubious to call that anything. There's some human type thing there. And we've got a few, I think there's now 4 charcoal dates by ABOX in this site. Preservation is very, very poor, but it suggests that the uppermost level that these things came from was 37 to 36-ish thousand years. So this is post-Heinrich Event 4 and comparative in age to the evolved origination in the north. João insists this is Neanderthal. I'm not convinced at all. Unfortunately, we can't date this shell. It's just too poorly preserved. Oh. So there are kind of 4 scenarios in the south. The first one is no sediment exists. This is kind of unlikely given the number of sites we've got, or kind of there are a lot of limestone areas, there are a lot of caves in southern Iberia. But the argument goes that during Heinrich events, during these very cold events, the marine record suggests that you've got a decrease in vegetation cover, a replacement of oak woodlands with grasslands. So you've got a change in hydrology and an increase in erosion, which would potentially remove all of the sediment. Whether this affects all sites, I guess we have to wait and see in the future for new dating studies and for new sites to be discovered. But it's certainly kind of sure that in every site where we've got a Middle Paleolithic overlain by an Upper Pal, whether it's Aurignacian or Gravettian or something later, there is an unconformity at every single site. I think it's about 16 sites now. So if you've got no sediment, and we've definitely got no dates, or very, very few dates, the possibility is that Neanderthals did exist in southern Iberia, but we can't show that. We could also say that modern humans were present, either with Neanderthals or without them, spreading into the southern regions soon after they arrived in northern Iberia, but we just don't have evidence for them yet. There are scattered bladelets, there are scattered perforated shells, as you do find in many Proto-Aurignacian around the Mediterranean. So that there is potential that they were there. We just haven't found them yet. And the other reason is that the southern region of Iberia is abandoned. I don't think there's much point speculating about which one you think is most likely, because we just don't have any evidence or any secure evidence. But the main conclusion then is that it is unlikely that modern humans stopped at the Ebro because of the Heinrich event. So João's reason for the Ebro frontier is flawed. So if that pattern does exist, we have to find a reason why. So yeah, we just have to continue taking skeletons out of the closet. Okay.
Well, I think we have a little bit of time. If anyone has questions for Rachel, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer a few.
What's the present position in Gibraltar?
Clive Finlayson is excavating at the back, so at the rear of the cave, where you have a solution above what he thinks is a Mysterian. Again, I think there's about 50 flakes in that level, of which one is a Levallois flake. That's his diagnostic thing. And he has dates from, he's got a lot of dates, about 20 dates, from what he relates to a hearth unit that range from 32 to, I think, 24 uncalibrated. From a single hearth unit, that's unusual. Yeah, so I'm not convinced. The samples were treated with ABA. Charcoal preservation at Gibraltar is extremely poor. A lot of the charcoal that was dated in Oxford actually contained practically no carbon. So a lot of the Oxford dates that were done before should be discarded. And in fact, Tom's got a paper coming out on that pretty soon. Yeah, so at the rear of the cave, Clive says that there's no charcoal left to redate, so I haven't been able to touch it. In the front of the cave, so this is the older excavations of Nick Barton and Chris Stringer. You've got a lot of charcoal dates from what initially was published as possibly Mysterian, very bioturbated, we're not quite sure. I think the diagnostic things in that unit were a Levallois flake and I think a rejuvenation flake from a prismatic core, which is Upper Pal normally. And that was it. The charcoal that was dated in that level was actually very, very tiny and contained practically no carbon. So those young dates are completely unreliable, both on association grounds and on chemical grounds. So then the Mysterian with all of the beautiful, marine deposits in the bottom are beyond 50K, most of them. So, yeah. Gibraltar is a difficult one, but I don't think it's the key site.
Do you think if they can secure that, guess, 43,000-year-old date for those seal paintings that have been in the news recently, that would mean that Neanderthals painted them, or that they're more likely to,
No. The charcoal that was dated on those paintings was found. Well, it wasn't associated with the paintings, it was found near them. No Mysterian has actually been found in Nerja. It's completely Gravettian. So I'm not quite sure what they were talking about. And even if you did show an age of 43 calibrated, we've got the age from southern Italy that now is supposedly modern human. I would like to see any reviews that come out on the biometric analysis they did on those teeth before I say too much. And also Kent's Cavern is of a similar age. So I don't think it's definitively, but, yep.
Yeah, look, I think the technical work that you're doing is very impressive. I think that one of the problems that you're running into is not a dating problem, but a problem with the archaeologists.
Yep.
And the built-in presumptions about the uniform connection between certain hominids and certain behaviours, which has not really been demonstrated. And the obvious example is that one site that was yielding a date far too old for the Upper Palaeolithic on the basis of a few blades. And we know blade industries occurred throughout the last 100,000 years in Europe. There's no simple association with modern sapiens.
Yeah.
I think, I guess, and I could go on with other examples.
Yeah.
You actually said that the Mysterian underlies proto-origination.
Mhm.
Well, it does within individual sequences, but that doesn't mean that that proto-origination and Mysterian couldn't be contemporary in different sites, as the case is in Central Europe for parallel industrial sequences. So I guess if you want a question out of that, rather than just a sort of statement of the complexities, is how are you going to deal with the archaeology?
Well, the initial assumption was that we were going to take the names that were given to us by the archaeologists. So we're testing the archaeologist sequence. The whole thing about the different sites, well, that's why you do radiocarbon dating, so that you can see if they're the same. But we do have, for instance, the proto-origination spanning a reasonably long time. So for us, we work in radiocarbon labs, we'd kind of hope that archaeologists would look at their lithic assemblages, particularly the kind of outlying ones, to try to work out why are these actually what would be called proto-origination? Does it mean that this proto-origination is actually an adaptation to groups trying to do something different to things that the early origination were doing? So is it a chronological problem? Is it a problem with names? Is it a problem with people using different typological systems? So we were very, very aware of the problem with the archaeologists, but you need a robust chronology so the archaeologists at least know which sites, which assemblages to kind of grab onto to analyse further and compare between. So is your oldest proto-origination at La Becocorba or Abric Romani the same as the one at La Breda, which continues for a long time and actually has split base bone points in? I would suggest that La Breda is proto-origination is actually a palimpsest. The excavators don't believe me. Somebody else needs to go in and look at that again. It's a problem we were very aware of.
I guess my point is, whatever the outcome on those sites, it doesn't tell you which hominid made them.
No. That's why I try to show the the earliest dates that we do have for hominins. It's a problem. There are so few hominins that we just don't know, which is the origination used as a proxy for modern humans. The Châtelperronian, who knows?
Any further questions?